name is Sarah Volk, and I teach math at Fargo North High School here in Fargo. And so I'm our facilitator, mediator tonight on our roundtable discussion on teachers or pre-service teachers bringing their burning questions that they want to ask a group. So I know that we kind of have a little bit of a mix. Mostly some are our pre-service teachers here, but hopefully you came with a question or two. If not, I thought of a few that I think would be good. So I don't know if we want to just start by, if I know that some people have introduced in the chat, if you're willing to introduce your group over video, that I think it's just a little bit easier to put a name to the face if you're comfortable with that.
Hi, I'm Kathy Williams, and I'm the current president of NDCTM, so the State Math Association. And I'm excited to be here for this roundtable.
Most of you know me. I'm Harmony Richmond. I'm an instructor at Valley City State University and am part of the board of directors for NDCTM as the higher ed rep. And I'm glad, it looks like outside of Sarah and yourself, that all of the others are my pre-service teachers. I was explaining to Sarah that they are currently in Math 278, Math for Elementary Teachers 2, which focuses on standards in grades 6 through 8. And so I bribed them with some extra credit to attend tonight. So I'm really excited to see that there's so many of them here tonight. And there's multiple, some of them have multiple people within, they just are sharing computers.
All right, well, we can go ahead and try to get into some of the questions. Maybe just to break the ice a little bit, that I did receive a question via email from one of the people taking this for credit that wasn't able to attend in person, but is planning to watch it via YouTube after the fact. And he was asking about, his question was about how teachers respond to students finding the answer keys for the worksheets on the internet. I guess I would assume that maybe his textbook company worksheets, a student had found the answer keys on the internet and had emailed them to all the students in the class. And another issue that he notices along with this for homework completion are the students that are using an application of some sort to do the math for them. So he was asking kind of how others have dealt with this in the past, or if they had any thoughts on this. So yeah, that was what that teacher had emailed me.
So what a great question, right? Especially in the age of technology. And it's certainly one I know I have faced. I'm sure you have too, Sarah. Remind me again, are the teachers in the class, are they pre-service or in-service teachers, or a combination?
The current ones here tonight are pre-service teachers.
Oh, wonderful.
At the same time, they do participate in a subbing program every Friday. So they are actively in the classroom with practicums and subbing as well. But I think the one that Sarah's talking about, I actually believe he's in one of my online classes currently, because he emailed me that exact same question. And I just feel for him. He's got a lot on his plate right now. So having his learners find the answer key is certainly heartbreaking for him, because he doesn't have a whole lot of time to do much else by taking classes, coaching, and teaching full time. So what I had offered to him was that the importance of making learning individualized to each student, so that maybe ideally creating an environment where learners have to create something to prove their learning rather than just rote memorization and plug and chug. I know that plug and chug certainly has to happen, but providing opportunities for his learners to prove their learning in other ways outside of just rote paper pencil homework is what I encouraged.
Yeah, you know, I'm currently teaching at the university level also, and I teach a lot of college algebra, and there freshmen learn pretty quickly that you can go on to a number of sites and plug in just about anything and get the answer to it. So it's a question we deal with at every level. And I think partly, you know, one response I would have to that is that students have to see that those exercises are just that, they're exercises. that they have to practice in order to pass a test at some point. And so I don't make the homework worth very much at all. I know teachers who don't make those kinds of practice exercises worth anything. So that's one way to do it, is to say, well, remember, the goal is to prepare you for your test. And if you do that by copying or cheating in some way, you won't be well prepared. Another way around that is to assign homework where the student has to perhaps explain why that's the correct answer. And then I think if we get into those hows and whys more than the whats, it's harder for students to cheat. And then of course it's also deeper thinking on their part and more important thinking.
Yeah, that's something one of my teachers used to do all the time, like in not just in mathematics, but also especially in science. That was the big thing that my teacher did. And yeah, if you can't explain it, then you probably don't know it. So good tactic right there.
I was even thinking too, just the purpose of the exercises, like you said, being exercises, that you could even open up your next class with some type of opening problems just to check to see not only did they do the homework, but did they get that intended learning out of those exercises. And it lets you know as a teacher, if you're able to move on with the new learning, if they mastered what they were supposed to the day before or through completing the exercises, that could be an option. Also, something to think about.
I'd be curious to hear what pre-service teachers think about the idea of scoring homework in general. You know, what is the value of homework?
Well, as a pre-service teacher myself, as far as scoring homework goes, you basically score it on exactly what you made the assignment out for. Like, for example, if you're teaching like a math lesson, like what we're here for technically, and you see that a student spelled a word wrong, you don't necessarily, like, say it's a third grade student and they spell the word for incorrectly. You'd give them the points for getting the answer correct, not necessarily the spelling.
I appreciate there your focus on the learning goal, right? We're looking at what is it that we hope the exercise would accomplish.
And just last week, a few of my learners in this particular class, I think it was last week or the week before, whatever it was, they had made a comment at how they should have just Googled the answer and they would have gotten something right on their physics homework. They could have just Googled it. Why didn't they Google it beforehand? They just need to pass this class. They just need to get on with, you know, it's just one general they have to get out of the way. And I said, oh, well, are you Googling my answers? You know, and they laughed and giggled and said, we can't Google your answers. When your answers don't exist out there. We have to come up with them on our own. So I appreciate that their willingness for them to the things that you say, such as explain how they got somewhere, why it is the way it is, and taking it that one step further certainly allows me as a teacher to make sure they understand the concepts, they're using the vocabulary correctly, and all those things that are also important for pre-service teachers, but yet they're understanding the content as well.
Well, something else that I was kind of wondering about, as it's that time of year where it's starting to drive me bonkers, is if anybody has any good strategies for keeping students off of their phones during class. I feel like that's a plague of teachers right now.
Well, one way to do that might be to do something that my drama instructor used to do, and that would be to basically confiscate the phones for the duration of the class. That'd be a way to make sure, of course, no one's going to, but if the teacher could trust their students with it, fine. But if a teacher can't trust it, having your phone is a privilege just as much as having an iPad or anything. So in my opinion, you could just confiscate them if they're causing problems. I don't know about anyone else's thoughts on that matter. What do you guys think?
Macy agrees with you, you know, that she had an experience where the class had a drop box right by the door when you walked into the classroom. I know when I was teaching in the high school, had a kind of a shoe tree, or they call them calculator holders now, but where you'd hang them on the wall and there'd be a plastic space for each person's calculator. It'd be real easy to check whose was up there and whose wasn't.
I've heard of some colleagues in my building that have used that method, and that they offer a small amount of extra credit for the students to put their phone in there, because there's just been this discussion in the high school of, if you see them on it, you can certainly confiscate it, but can you really require them to put a phone in there when they walk in the door if they haven't had it out? And so I thought that was kind of an interesting idea, just as long as that extra credit wasn't maybe inflating their grade in some way. But I thought that was an interesting motivation to get them to participate.
What do you do, Sarah? I know with college freshmen, I tell them at the beginning, when they're reading the syllabus, phones and laptops aren't out, unless they're called for in the lesson, and I'll let you know. And I remind them periodically. It seems to work fairly well. I don't know if that works in high school. What do you do?
I have the same stance, that in general in our building, the rule, if you're not supposed to have them out, there might be some circumstances where you might feel it could be appropriate if it's for like maybe a quiz activity or something in class where it's interactive, that they could use their laptop or their phone. So sometimes it is easier if they use them, but I think a lot of high schools, the policy is that you see it, you take it. It just can create some confrontation in the classroom and can be really disruptive, unless they're being a big distraction. They're just distracted heavily by them. So even when you tell them to put them away.
If I can ask you guys something real quick. Like some students will bring things to keep themselves kind of entertained, like fidget cubes or fidget spinners. And sometimes those are great for keeping a focus of a student, but what would you do if it's the only thing that's keeping this kid focused, yet at the same time it's disturbing the others?
It's a really good question. I wonder if you could even have some kind of flexible seating in your classroom, like if you had a standing height desk or a standing height table, and periodically throughout the day, because in the elementary classroom, those students are probably in that classroom all day, that maybe just at certain times or a certain number of times per day, that student could go to that designated area to use that fidget spinner, and maybe that area is not as close proximity to other students that could be easily distracted. We don't have too many students in the high school level that do that, but it's the only thing I could think of.
Yeah, and even when I was teaching high school, I occasionally had a student who needed to get up and move a good deal. And so I like your idea. I would often just, create a space that a person could stand up and pace, and standing desks are nice to have. Do you have those in the high school?
In some rooms they do. I actually moved into a larger classroom this year and have space for a conference table size adjustable height table with a whiteboard top. And so I have 2 or 3 students that really enjoy standing while they do notes. And so they enjoy that. And in my 2-period Algebra 2 class that I have, so we meet for 2 hours straight, that during work time that there's a group of 5 or 6 kids that'll circle around that table and do their work together. So they really like that option of being able to stand up.
I would have loved it as a student. So I really appreciate the need to fidget and the need to be up and moving. I see someone has written that students use their iPads during class, even when the phone maybe is put away. And I wonder, are those iPads that belong to the school, that students are supposed to be using for academic reasons?
I would say yes, because they sub mainly, this group will subs at the Valley City Public School District, and they are all one-to-one iPads in the elementary and the middle school where they're subbing. So even though their phones are put away, they do actually do a lot of things on their iPads, which almost leads me to be curious about and worried about the amount of screen time that they are receiving per day, utilizing them. I mean, just as as a supervisor to the subbing program, I just kind of bebop from room to room all day long on Fridays. And every time they go from room to room, they are on those iPads doing something. Usually, I would say 75% of the time that they're working is on a school-related activity. The other part is, oh, well, you finished, so you can have free time on your iPad, but it has to be an educational piece that you're doing. It can't just be something, a fun game or something. It has to be educational related. But then I'm thinking, if these are middle schoolers, even elementary schoolers, the amount of screen time is just astonishing how much they have, in my opinion.
Yeah, that frightens me. And I think it would be great if your learners were bringing into the classroom research related to that, right? On how much screen time is healthy. Even, going back to the iPhone, we do know from research that students who bring an iPhone into the classroom, even if it's tucked away in the backpack, do worse on tests than students who do not. So just the presence of the phone and the awareness that, it could buzz, and maybe so-and-so is texting me, results in lower test scores. And, at the University of North Dakota, when we shared that with students, I think it made a difference. And actually they were required to turn in their phone or have it out in front of them so we could see they weren't using it.
Back to the using the iPad for things that aren't educational related. There is a way you could monitor students so that they don't do that as much, like get off topic. With most of the iPads, the teacher has a little screen mirroring thing where she could see, or he or she could see what the students are doing on their own iPad. And if need be, they could even lock their iPad screen until they get over there and redirect them. Or possibly, if it happens too often, take away a privilege. There are ways to deal with this.
I noticed that Jocelyn agrees with you that there are classroom apps that will do that. And I've been thinking that same thing, that there are ways to control the use of those screens, even, lockdown browsers for laptops. I appreciate that Sarah has brought some issues, but we'd sure rather hear what's on your minds. As pre-service teachers, I'm sure there are things that you're thinking about, and even things that when you sub arise, right? Issues that arise that you might want to discuss here.
There has been a certain issue that I've had with a student before where I pass out a test and the student will absolutely refuse to do the test. Everyone else is working, and no matter many times I try to prompt the student, the student just basically said no every single time. And honestly, what could you do in that situation? Because the student needs to take their test.
So just for perspective, what age level are we talking about here?
This was about a 4th grader.
That's interesting, and it's always more difficult when you're a substitute because you don't have all the background. You don't know if this is typical for that student or this is something the student's just going through that particular day. It reminds me of how many decisions a teacher has to make in a day. I've heard it's in the thousands, right? Where you gradually, of course, gain experience that helps inform those decisions. But in a case like that, I'm thinking it may depend on whether it's causing a scene or a disruption for other students. But to create an alternate setting, an alternate time for that test would certainly be a possibility.
Okay.
And if you're the sub, it's a different issue, isn't it? You feel maybe obligated to get that test completed, but I don't think it would be worth a major struggle to do that. What do you think, Sarah?
Like you had said, I wonder if it was a problem that day, or if that student just tends to be kind of, I don't want to say combative, but not quite the right word choice, but just not wanting to participate. that it's too bad the teacher couldn't have left a note to give you a heads up. Hey, so-and-so, it's going to give you a hard time about that. I was even kind of thinking, and I know you have to be careful to leave them unattended, but I wonder if you could have pulled like a desk in the hall, if you knew that they weren't going to leave, like if there was any way you could see out the window, if they'd be able to do it in the hall. I know that could be distracting, but maybe just that change in setting where they, maybe if they felt the other students were watching them, or it made them anxious as other students finished faster than they do, because even some of my students in my high school setting that they have in their IEPs and their 504s, that they take their tests in an alternate setting, but not necessarily in a resource teacher's room or a case manager's room, but we even utilize like the team centers outside of our classrooms, and they said it just makes them less anxious to not see others get out of their desks and turn the tests in. So I think the reaction could be related to more of knowing what the problem is, and unfortunately as the sub, you don't maybe know the student well enough to know what the cause of their frustration is.
Exactly. So maybe next time something like that happens, just go ahead and try to change the scenery.
Yeah.
May we ask, Sarah, what you did try?
Well, I did go ahead and ask the student why they weren't taking the test, and the response was, honestly, it was, I don't know this stuff. Then I went ahead and asked a student to go ahead and just try their best on it anyway. Eventually, a para ended up coming in and trying to get the student to do his test, and he still wouldn't do it. And eventually, the para just left and left the student just sitting in his desk.
Yeah, it's interesting that the para, who probably knows the student, wasn't very successful either. But believe me, as you become more and more experienced as a teacher, and you do know what motivates that behavior, you do find ways to deal with that. Not knowing more, about the student, I would have found something else for the student to do and said, okay, we'll leave this for your teacher.
I wonder if you could have even, if it was a stapled sheet, if you could have taken the sheets apart and just convinced them to do one of the parts, maybe just cutting the task into something smaller, maybe they would have been, I know that maybe wouldn't have made the teacher happy, but getting part of it done would be getting better than getting none of it done. So.
Well, it was a single sheet.
Or even, again, and trying to be mindful of not disrupting others, but verbally working with the student to get started. Tell me what you do know about this. What have you been studying? And sometimes a conversation, a verbal test is another alternative.
With that in mind, how would you do that without like over helping the student?
Yeah, others feel free to jump in. And here, again, if we're thinking about the purpose of the assessment, right? It's to figure out what the student knows about the topic. And sometimes through that conversation and that oral examination, you can ascertain what the student knows just as well as if the student had taken the test. And I know what you're saying. We don't want to give the student an unfair advantage, but what we really do want to find out is what does that student know? And the more we work with rubrics, right, that say, is the student at this level, this level, this level, the more a conversation like that can help us determine, right? So it's not always just sort of right, wrong.
And I also think allowing learners to be able to prove their learning, not just test-based. Like if your classroom is just extremely test-based and they have a lot of anxiety regarding test-based, their student may not be successful no matter what you do. So allowing learners to be able to prove their learning in a multiple of different ways. Maybe that is a verbal test, or like you said, tell me what you know. Is certainly an option, and personally my go-to. I would rather have a bunch of different ways that you can show me your learning rather than one test, because I get to see you as a whole student, not just the test-taking student.
So is everybody in the group working at the elementary level, Harmony?
Yes. Once they obtain their licensure, though, they will be certified 1st through 8th grade.
Oh, wonderful. Mm-hmm.
I know that some of them have a fear of when they're subbing, especially in the elementary school. They are the teacher for the day. So they are teaching lessons just as if they were the regular teacher. Everything's, you know, as a sub would have laid out for them. However, when they get to the middle school, there is this terror feeling that they've had as a supervisor of subbing them. Oh my gosh, I'm going into an advanced algebra math class. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how to teach this. And there is certainly a difference, and Sarah, maybe you can help elaborate this as a high school math teacher yourself. If you're having a sub, you don't necessarily know that the sub you're having is content specific to you. So most instances in the middle and the high school level, when you have content specific teachers and you're not sure what type of sub you're going to have, the plans are usually more generic, a worksheet, a review with partners, you know, something that the sub isn't actually teaching with. But at the same time, if the kiddos have questions, you should be able to at least help guide them in some direction.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that statement that we, even in the Fargo area, have very few math specific subs. Sometimes there's some subs that like math or are comfortable with it. But often, especially if if it's a day where I really need instruction to continue and I'm looking at the difficulty level of the topic, often I've not recently gotten in the habit of creating an instructional video that follows the notes that I had already prepared for the students. And then the sub can project that and then pause after the examples for students to maybe finish writing down the examples. And depending on the comfort level of the sub, they may be able to answer some clarifying questions for the students. And I've had some subs that are really comfortable with that and are able to give additional examples from the ones that were in the notes. And so I would think as a sub coming in that has some comfort with math, that even watching that video for a couple times during the day, that they might feel pretty confident helping students on those topics by the end of the day, because maybe they were refreshed of something they haven't seen in a while.
I really like that idea.
Jane, I see that you use is it Screencastify or screen casting of some sort? I have all these learners do a lot of screencasting videos to show me and prove to me their learning. So I know that they're very confident in explaining themselves, I guess you could say, in that environment. So that's a great idea, Sarah, to have it pre-planned out, especially, I guess, as we move forward with the fear of the coronavirus like taking over the world. You know, I've been seeing a lot of emails coming through also as the ed tech teacher of how K-12 schools are going to move online and the fear that that's creating. To me, I'm like, oh, we just go online, it's no big deal, because it's my everyday norm to build an online environment for classes. But I would imagine in a K-12 atmosphere, that would be more of a daunting experience. But what you're doing by pre-recording the lessons would allow your class to continue as normal in the online environment.
Well, and I think if you were able to incorporate a feature like what we're doing with this math chat here, where it would give students an opportunity to ask questions on the parts that they didn't quite understand, that I think between those two, that it would be similar to a classroom experience. I mean, probably as close as you could remotely.
Absolutely. Zoom here allows you to share your screen, which is a really nice feature, especially as a math teacher. It also allows you as the teacher to share your iPad screen. So if you do have an iPad, especially with math, it's sometimes easier to show how to do something than explain it. Those features are really amazing with Zoom to be able to do.
Yeah, and I think more and more teachers are familiar with a lot of those capabilities, you know, for screencasting. And like you say, it's important. I know I just heard from my nephew at Vanderbilt that they're done for the year.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, so a lot of universities are sending their students home after spring break.
And at 1:30 this afternoon, the University of Minnesota across campus-wide, statewide, has now canceled.
Yep, I heard that. And I'm part of the Minnesota state system, so I'm waiting to hear what will happen.
Yeah, I mean, they're a big a role player in Minnesota, so.
So I hadn't heard that. I didn't follow the news this afternoon. So does that mean they're done, or they're switching to an online environment to finish? Okay.
Yeah, and it depends on the university, of course, but I think for the most part, online.
We also got an email this morning from our VPAA stating to really think about, for those classes that we have face-to-face, really think about how you're going to transform them into an online class over spring break with the large, and I don't want to get any of my learners excited that we're going online, but to be prepared in that situation. I imagine it would be a NDUS decision, not just individual campuses, but it would be their big decision maker. And actually, VCSU really follows Fargo and West Fargo and Moorhead, like follows kind of their lead, like what are they doing as big stakeholders, and then kind of follow their lead. So I'm sure they're also intently watching. I see that West Fargo isn't doing things across state lines. So that's like, I feel like it's just going to kind of snowball from here in the upcoming days.
Yeah, and speaking of online learning, I would be interested also to hear from your students about their take on that. Should public schools be getting students ready more and more for online learning? What is the value of face-to-face learning? Is that something maybe you talk about in your classes?
That sounds I teach ed tech online and on campus, and to be honest, I feel like online environment certainly limits some of the things that we can do, especially in ed tech. My ed tech online class can't dive into AR and VR and mixed reality as much as we can do, because I can't require them to buy goggles. I can't require them to get all the fun equipment that we use to explore. I can't require them to go buy Ozobots. I can't require them to go buy Spheros. And those are things that I can just borrow from the STEM lab and bring over and play with. I believe there's a lot of merit in the flexibility, I believe, especially with online learning. It allows us, right now my ed tech online class, they're all paraprofessionals. So it allows them to work full time and to progress to a degree that they're, looking like their ultimate dream. It provides that flexibility, but I feel like even though we incorporate things like Seesaw to like video record and Flipgrid and those things to try to make some more interaction face to face, and I offer weekly webinars like this using Zoom, I still feel that there's a lack of being able to get to know them. Like, I feel like at this part in the semester, I know all of my 277 and 278 learners extremely well. I could probably tell you where they're from, what activities they're partaking in, who their friends are, maybe who their boyfriend or girlfriend is, what activities they like. And I just don't get that with the online learners. I feel a little disconnected no matter how hard you try. Yep, and Macy says that we use Blackboard as our LMS, and Blackboard has an ability to create called Blackboard Collaborate, where it's a built-in video conferencing within each class that we can build.
Yeah, so you still have that ability for that collaboration. I wonder still though if it lacks a certain dimension, what students think about that, kinesthetically speaking. There's not much action to it. I wonder if any of the students who are participating via the chat room would be willing to talk to us via audio, even if you don't use the video. For example, Macy, would you be willing to talk about your feelings about Blackboard Collaborate?
Hello, this is Macy. Hi. So I'm definitely like a hands-on learner, so I feel like I may struggle with just being online. I do take online classes, but I do prefer the face-to-face just because I like the human interaction more, and just to be able to work on things with my hands, like Harmony said, with the Ozobots and the merge cubes. We did a bunch of stuff with that. And I would rather prefer that than not being able to work with my hands type of thing.
Thanks, Macy. Appreciate that. I think I would feel the same way.
Hi, this is Jane. What I enjoyed about Screencastify is just a Google add-on. So like I didn't have to like go get a new or sign up for Blackboard or anything like that, because once it's recorded, it's just in your drive. So you can share it with anybody who has Google, which is everybody. But I liked it. There's different ways to do it, but what I did is I just record my screen, and then with a mic I do audio. So like I'm not up there I'm up there at my smartboard, but all they see is my writing and hear my voice, but it's basically like the lesson I would do anyway. And it's worked really well. I have a couple students who are with some like chronic illness issues, so they're gone a lot. So like I just immediately send them the link, and then they can watch the video and stay caught up that way.
I would also imagine that it would be helpful if you're doing it frequently, helpful for parents to be able to see what the lesson looks like if they're helping their child at home with homework. So they can have a refresher too, to see what is the instructor looking for and how are they doing something. So I think that's also a benefit. Granted, as a teacher, you have enough things to do, but record your lesson every day would be kind of a daunting experience to put up somewhere. But if you were to do a little bit at a time, eventually you would have a nice repertoire of videos to present.
Well, and I couldn't tell if Jane did it this way or not, but I actually have a colleague in my building that records one of her periods during the day. So not during a prep hour before or after school, but actually does it during class. So I mean, there is some of that, because she thinks it's important to capture some of that group interaction and to see what some of the students are going to ask. So there's still that behind the scenes of having to go through the work of posting it somewhere, but at least you're recording something you would have had to do anyway.
Do you know what she uses to record? Does she do it herself, or does she have a camera?
She uses it, I think she usually uses like an iPad. So hers is not a screen capturing one, that it is videoing her at the front of the room. But I thought that was kind of an interesting idea that she did it that way.
Yeah, they have a thing called, we use it during our SEGS meetings when we're having people from a distance, called swivel. So if you wear something around your neck, the iPad will twist on this thing and record where you are. So if you have, it's FERPA, you should be careful about getting learners in there, but at least you can see the teacher moving. You're not just staring at one location. So it would move where the teacher's moving.
What do you say that was called again?
I believe it's called swivel.
Swivel.
Just as you would spell swivel.
Yeah, it's like SWVL or something. Yeah, I've used it before too. My students refer to it, when I use it to record lessons, they call it R2D2, because it kind of moves like that, and it takes a little bit of getting used to, that's for sure.
So it's just a program, or is it a camera that you have to buy?
It's a mount for an iPad. Or I don't know if they have ones that work with other cameras as well, but this one you stick in, it's a base for an iPad.
Yeah, I can find the link for you, Sarah, the one that we use in SEGS, and send it to you, see if you wanted to look at it more.
That'd be awesome.
It's my understanding that they're expensive, but depending on where you work, your school district might be able to get one of those for you. Well, I thought we maybe on a little bit more of a fun note, I don't know if this is something you guys have talked about in your methods class or not, but it is getting to be that time of year where it's closer to Pi Day, and I was wondering if anybody had any fun suggestions for either ideas they've tried or want to try for celebrating Pi Day with students.
It might be fun to go ahead and bring an actual pie or a little selection of pies into the classroom that day and teach on fractions.
I think getting to have pie at the end could be pretty motivating.
I apologize, 278 learners. I do have a special treat for you tomorrow in class, but I don't have a special activity because we have our presentations that we're doing. However, last year we still had our Ozobots, so we created different size circles, and they recorded how fast it took the Ozobot to go around the different size circles, and then compared, and they found the averages and ended up being super close to pi. So they thought it was really cool to see like how pi is derived, and it doesn't matter the size of the circle, that it still is 3.14, the ratio. So that was a pretty fun activity to bring in technology into a math classroom. I apologize, I don't have the Ozobots, guys, so we're not doing that tomorrow. But
one of the favorite things I've done almost every year for Pi Day now is we make a pi chain. So we use like different colored strips of paper, like purple represents 3 and white represents 1 and blue represents 4. And then you put them together using the digits of pi. So just, you know, like a paper chain that you'd use at a party or whatever, but that ends up getting like all the colors in there. So then you get to understand, they see the purpose of, like, when we say it's a never ending number, kind of visually seeing this chain just keeps going and I just keep adding numbers, and they think it's fun and it's distracting and it can take up a lot of time, which they like, just something different to do during the day.
Well, and I like the use of colors, because depending on your age group, if you're able to talk about that idea of a property of an irrational number with those digits going on without a pattern, that they might be able to see by the colors that there's not that repeating pattern. So I think that's kind of a cool idea too.
I've done some different things through the years, and a lot of them involved eating pies or pizzas or whatnot. But also I try to bring in, you know, the ethnomathematics of the concept, and show that this is not a concept that was developed exclusively in Greece by white guys, but show other areas on the planet where the same idea was developing at about the same time even.
When I was in school, we made Pi Day bracelets. So it'd be like with beads and a string. And for the 3, you'd put like 3 of one color, and then point would be like white, and then 1 would be one color of another, then 4 a different color. And it was really cool to see all the different colors that represented those pi numbers.
Those all sound like really good ideas. Not recently, but some years in the high school and middle school level, I've had my students have dressed, and maybe, I don't know, dressed up like nerds, so had like a nerd day contest, and you can definitely see their creativity with that. Yeah, and I've done some of the math history like Kathy had mentioned too, just showing how long people have been thinking about and using that number pi. So yeah, some fun ideas. Some of the older students are even interested. You can find some, if you do an internet search for that Buffon's needle experiment, showing that tie to probability and how pi gets into that can be really interesting, and just letting that applet run even through all of class, just seeing how accurate that probability model gets to a value of pi. Some of those upper level students really find that interesting. So
one instance in my high school too, we did for Pi Day. It's not really like beneficial for learning, but we'd get some teachers and we'd get some whipped cream and a pie dish, and then we'd try and throw it at their face type of thing. Like we couldn't get many teachers to participate in it, but it was always a fun thing. It had the students, you know, have some fun and laugh a little bit. So
Nice to have a math holiday.
mm-hmm.
Even my sister, who's an attorney, texted me to say, hey, we're having pie on Pi Day, thought you'd like to know. And I think for younger students too, it might be interesting to even talk about, you know, just in terms of number sense, how many digits of pi have been computed, and how many, you know, pages of newsprint that would be. Of course, kids don't know newsprint the way they used to.
I also saw a statistic that students that are in currently, who are freshmen through seniors in college, have never licked a stamp either, since they're all stickers now. So I thought that was interesting.
Harmony, I sense you have a strong tech background, and maybe you know a little bit too about supercomputers looking for more digits of pi.
I don't dabble in that part. I dabble in how to incorporate technology into the classroom. That sounds to me more, in my opinion, more like computer science study. in that process. But I mean, I guess coding as well would play into that.
Well, I think our time is almost up. Any burning questions before we wrap up and look forward to celebrating Pi Day? Well, we'll be celebrating at the State Math Conference in West Fargo on Pi Day this year. I think it's been a long time since the conference itself fell on Pi Day.
That ought to be fun.
I haven't heard anything about pie being served unless it's a surprise. I was worried that if I brought up that idea that somebody'd say, sure, you can bring pie. So it's one of those things where you're like, do you bring it up or do you not bring it up?
We'll have to see what we can do.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. It was nice to have a few more participants, and we appreciate your comments and questions in the chat box to keep things going as well. But yeah, on behalf of NDCTM, we appreciate hearing from more teachers in the state. And if you ever have any other questions for any of us, feel free to reach out. That we'd be happy to try to answer your questions or connect you with somebody that might be able to help out. So thank you for joining us.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night.